I never worked on scales at all. And I remember the first lesson, was the... all of that kind of pretty, flat picking stuff. But
so if you hear that, everybody, you don't need to learn scales.
You don't have to. No, you absolutely don't.
The best acoustic guitar player in the world is telling you don't learn your scales.
Welcome to Inside the Noise by Guitar Center, where we interview the artists, the leaders, and the innovators in the music industry. I'm Gabe Dalporto, CEO of Guitar Center. Let's go inside the noise.
Dang, did you see that? And you make it look easy. Wow. I'd like to say one day I'll be able to do that, but it's just not true.
Oh, yeah, we'll have it today, man.
Hey, everybody. I'm here with Trey Hensley. You're going to love this conversation. Trey is a 2025 Grammy Award-winning artist. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. He
is the reigning International Bluegrass Music Association champion. He won the World Championship of Bluegrass. He's been called the most exciting guitar player to emerge in a generation. And he really has a genre bending style that, it goes from bluegrass to country to blues. And has a new album out that we'll get into. I'm really excited about that. But thank you for joining us, Trey Hensley.
So glad to be here. Yeah, thanks for having me.
The pleasure is mine. And Trey, maybe it would be great just to take us back and tell me, how'd you get into music? How'd you get into guitar?
I grew up kind of in a musical family by way of just listening to records and listening to music all the time. My dad played banjo when I was a kid, but he's been a car mechanic all of his life, and so he kind of put the banjo aside one day and never played it again. But other than that, nobody in my family played music. But it was, it seemed like we listened to music all the time, and in particular, bluegrass and older country music from the 50s and 60s. And I grew up in the 90s of watching, all the kind of CMT strummer guitar players. And so I would, I've been aware of guitar my whole life, and it's always been something I've been drawn to. But really just the bluegrass thing was what I really loved. I grew up kind of listening to the Flat and Scruggs records and hearing that style of guitar playing, which is flat picking guitar. Really caught my ear, and I would go to a lot of bluegrass festivals. I grew up in East Tennessee, which is pretty rich in history with, all bluegrass, and the birthplace of country music is in East Tennessee in Bristol, which is, 25 miles from where I grew up. And so country and bluegrass are pretty prominent. And growing up, I would go to bluegrass festivals, and I got to see this guy, Charlie Waller, who was the very first person I ever saw in person take a guitar solo. And from then on, that was kind of it. I went home
how
that
old
day,
were you?
So I got a guitar when I was 9, but that was when I was 10.
Okay.
I took lessons, and for some reason, it didn't click until I actually got to see, somebody playing live in person, and then it was all over,
Yeah. And then did you go back to lessons, or how did you learn?
I did, yeah. So I took a year off, I was into baseball and doing all kids stuff, And then when I went to that bluegrass festival, I got my guitar back out and started taking lessons from a great teacher out in East Tennessee that was really well versed in the style of guitar playing that I wanted to play, which is, a lot of Doc Watson stuff and old Carter family tunes and things like that, So I started taking that next week, and it kind of snowballed from there.
And so how did he start you off? He's just like, okay, let's play a song together? Or,
yeah, it was funny.
Or did he take you through the grueling scales, or
No, I never worked on scales at all. And I remember the first lesson, was the... all of that kind of pretty, flat picking stuff, but never scales. The guy that I took lessons from was pretty old school, and he was in his 70s when I started taking lessons.
So if you hear that, everybody, you don't need to learn scales.
You don't have to. No, you absolutely don't.
The best acoustic guitar player in the world is telling you don't learn your scales.
Yeah, it's funny because as I've progressed, as a player or tried to, there have been moments of going back and trying to work on theory and stuff. But for me, it's all been ear based and just picking apart solos and that was him. So like I would take a lesson, learn a song, and then it got to the point where I would call him that night and learn another song over the phone.
Oh wow!
And so it was a couple songs a day.
That's not normal, you know that, right?
Yeah, I mean, and he would tell me that it's like this is not really my normal thing. It's like typically one, and it's funny because I've taught guitar to other people. And it's like, well, it can be grueling, but it always. I think there was just such a love for it already that I was just eating up with it. I mean, I'd come home from school and just play guitar.
That's great. So 10, you start really practicing and playing, and then where does it go from there?
So I met this guy Marty Stuart, who was always one of my favorite musicians, and
how'd you meet him?
So I met him. He was playing at a local fair out in East Tennessee, and I'd been playing for I think around 6 months or maybe a little bit less than that. And I had this big felt guitar case, and all I wanted was for him to sign it, And I got to go backstage and meet him before his show. He had 2 shows, so I met him in between, and I got to play a couple songs for him. And his story growing up, like he started playing with Lester Flatt when he was 13, and he went on the road and didn't go to school, just went straight on the road.
Yeah, wow.
But his first record that he ever had was a Flatt and Scruggs record, and the song that I played for him was this old song called Jimmy Brown the Newsboy. And it has this particular guitar part that Earl Scruggs would play. The song is... So all those slides were banjo slides, and Earl was a banjo player that played guitar on those records. And so not many people would play that. It was just one of those, you either had, it was kind of, if you know, one of those moments. And so he picked up that I was in the know of, this Earl Scruggs stuff. And so we kind of instantly became, kindred, had this bond, and he invited me to play that night with him on his show. And then he invited me.
You've been playing 6 months.
Yeah,
playing on his show.
So that was my first moment, and it was the entirety.
This is not normal.
Yeah, like the entirety of my town.
Yeah.
And I grew up in a small town, but it was one of those moments. And then when we got off stage, he said, "I want to have you at the Opry." And so about 5 months after that, he invited me to play at the Ryman with him, and he invited Earl Scruggs to come out then.
Hey, I just want to say thank you so much for listening to the podcast. We've actually been really overwhelmed by the response so far, so thank you for that. We have also noticed that a lot of you haven't subscribed yet. We have incredible guests coming up. I'm not even allowed to tell you who they are, but trust me, you don't want to miss this. So hit subscribe. That way you don't miss an episode. Now back to the program.
You get to play at the Grand Ole Opry after 1 year of practicing.
Yeah.
What have you played?
So I played Jimmy Brown, the newsboy, on that show that night, and I became super close with Earl. And if you've been to the Ryman, especially if you've played there, at the time, this would have been 2002. The backstage area was exactly the way it would have been in 1950. And so everybody shared a dressing room, or they had maybe 2 or 3, and everybody shared one. But they always had the star of the show in Roy Acuff's dressing room. And so they put Earl in there, and they put me with Earl. And so for like 3 hours, I just got to sit and pick songs with him and talk to him. And we became fast friends. And, it's funny because I've met so many people, or I've worked with so many people, in my adult life that I met through Earl. People like Stuart Duncan and Rob Ikes, who I was in a duo with, and Jerry Douglas, and so many people that just because
So he was your mentor?
Earl. Yeah, I mean, I would say Marty and Earl were definitely like equally mentors at that time, because I would just go play on their shows, They would let me come up and play a few songs. And then fast forward a little bit after that, where I grew up is in the corner of Tennessee. So it's 20 minutes from Virginia, 20 minutes from North Carolina border. And right across the Virginia border, so if Bristol, Tennessee, there's a town called Hilton's, Virginia. And that's where all the Carter family were from. So like A.P. Carter, Sarah Carter, Maybelle were all from out there. And I would go up there on Saturday nights and play at this Carter Family Fold. They're still going on out there. It's a great little venue out in Hilton's. 2002 era, and Johnny Cash and June Carter Cash were going out there pretty often. And so I got to meet Johnny Cash and started working with them pretty regularly. I'd go up to Maybelle Carter's house, and they were working on a record at the time, and I was going to play some guitar on it. At least once a week we'd get together, and so I became close friends with them. So I had these really great mentors that were heroes. From
I was just introducing my kids to Johnny Cash.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
It's funny because my daughter's 10, and she doesn't like much of the music that I like, but she loves Johnny Cash.
Yeah.
And
He's just timeless.
It kind of clicked a couple weeks back because we were driving down the road, and I was telling her some story about Johnny, and I think it finally clicked for her. That was like, oh, you actually knew him, which is cool. I haven't been cool. I haven't been cool before, so that
doesn't matter who you are as a parent. You're not cool to your kids.
The Grammys. She went with me to the Grammys, and that was cool.
Yeah.
But it's still the few and far between moments.
How old is she?
10. Just turned 10.
Oh, well, you got a ways.
Yeah,
but eventually you'll become
early,
cool.
Yeah. I'm a little early.
They'll come around.
Cool.
Well, okay, so you you get to play the Grand Ole Opry, you get to meet Johnny Cash, you've got these great mentors. So tell me, where do you go from there? That's a pretty high bar at a pretty young age.
Yeah.
You're still living in East Tennessee. How do you kind of break out?
I did several albums when I was a kid. The first one I did was because of Johnny. I played at June Carter Cash's birthday party. And this guy, Tom T. Hall, was there, who's an amazing, legendary country music songwriter and an artist. At the time, he and his wife owned a house in Franklin, Tennessee, and they would have oftentimes bluegrass musicians come in. And it never really got publicized that they were doing it, but they had this, amazing studio, and they would just let you come live on the spare house on their property, record their studio for free.
Wow.
And Johnny kind of cornered Tom T and was like, "Hey, you should produce this kid's CD."
How old were you?
I was 12.
Oh my God.
When I did that one. And it's in bluegrass, everything is pretty much done live in the studio. And that was the quickest I've ever done a record. I think we did 14 songs that morning / afternoon.
Wow.
You can kind of tell it. I was a 12-year-old kid, so it wasn't like we were going to sell a million records. But it was fun. It was a great experience, And I started playing.
And were you playing other people's songs or your songs?
Yeah, I didn't start writing until I was a teenager, It was just all covers. And actually, that was one of the things was that if you recorded at their house, they would write songs for you. And so they wrote 6 songs for my first album. And then I did a couple more bluegrass albums, and then I started playing country music or electric guitar, and I got into all different kinds of music at that point. And the town I grew up in had a nice little record shop, and the guy the first thing was he gave me a copy of Led Zeppelin 1 because it was around the time that Robert Plant had done a record with Alison Krauss, and he's like, "Oh, I'm sure you're gonna want that record," and I was like, "Oh, I love Alison. I don't know who Robert Plant is." And so he went over and he got a copy of Led Zeppelin 1 and opened it and gave it to me. He's like, "You've got to listen to this." And so I got into, Jimmy Page and Van Halen.
There was a documentary, I think it was the making of Led Zeppelin or something like that.
Oh,
Did you see that?
I haven't seen that yet.
Super interesting.
I'll have to check that out.
It was, when they first started touring, people didn't know what to make of them. and in England, and I think they went to Norway or something weird or Sweden, and people are they kind of revolted. It was they're like, what the hell is this?
Yeah, I have seen that there's a nice clip on YouTube of, I think it's How Many More Times, from one of their first shows in England, and everybody's just sitting really still.
They're like,
and nobody knows what to do. And I kind of get it. It had to have sounded like a, space shuttle landing or something.
Completely.
Right in the middle of an arena. But yeah, I remember hearing that, Good Times, Bad Times solo, because that's the first track on Zeppelin 1, and I will never not want to do that. That's what I'm going to want to do forever. And I got way into, electric guitar, and somewhere down the line, got into Slayer and Iron Maiden and
Okay,
and
you
all
went the
that.
whole-
I went the whole
way.
way, and even equally into Grant Green and Wes Montgomery and Miles Davis, and it's always been like that's one of my favorite things is just searching for music but getting back. I was playing some electric shows, and me and my wife moved to Nashville 2012 or something like that, and I did a record as a part of a duo with this guy Rob Ikes. Not long after I moved to town, and that record got nominated for a Grammy. And so,
my God.
like everything.
And at this point, you're maybe 20 years old?
Yeah, 21, I think.
Yeah.
was when I first moved to town. So there's been these kind of moments where everything, might have snowballed, and then it slows down a little bit. And then obviously there was so much, transition from being a kid to being a teenager to being an adult that, when I've toured the majority of my life, up until this point.
Well, so tell me, when did you start touring?
Pretty much immediately, like as soon as I played the Opry.
Wow.
And it's funny because my dad, I mentioned him earlier.
You're 11 years old, you've been playing for a year, and now you're on tour. My God.
And going to school. And it was
How do you fit it all in?
It was a very light version of a tour, but it was busy for a kid that, was going to school. And like I said, my dad being a car mechanic seconded as a manager, which, he did the best he could at. But, I was just playing anywhere at that point, anywhere that I could, and was very busy, and like I said, started getting electric shows and, did a lot of...
Are you still solo or you have a band at this
I had a band for most things. And like when I started doing electric stuff, I got to open like a summer's worth of shows for Charlie Daniels, and, do some cooler things with that project. But then when I moved to Nashville, I started getting back into acoustic guitar and bringing everything that I had kind of picked up through electric into my acoustic playing. And because I started on acoustic guitar, and I love playing electric, but there's always been something about playing an acoustic guitar that...
So what did that, how did that change your playing, your acoustic playing?
I mean, I think the biggest thing, for me, one thing was when I picked up the electric, I went from 13 gauge strings to 10 gauge strings on a telly. And so obviously I got into bending, and I was, I would hear B.B. King play stuff that, it's like, I want to be able to do that on an acoustic guitar, but I don't want to have to sacrifice not having 13 gauge strings so I can, it's got that power and volume. And so it was a big kind of a hurdle to figure out how to play more electric style playing on acoustic guitar. And, I'll kind of liken it to a similar experience, I would assume, to like Clarence White, because when he was playing acoustic guitar in the 60s with his brother Roland, in the Kentucky Colonels. Then he joins the Byrds. He's playing, telly and does all this B-bender stuff, and then comes back to playing acoustic. And at that point, he was doing a lot of chicken picking kind of stuff, where you're using your middle finger to play. And I would chicken pick on telly, but I really can't. It doesn't. I don't have the volume.
You can't see this, but you're totally using your fingers.
It's my finger and the pick.
Yeah.
Which is way different sound than all pick. There's more volume and there's more control with just a pick. But it was definitely a lot of bends, a lot more. Like when I was growing up, it was all 5th fret and below. That was, you just played melody, just stuck to the melody, and there was definitely more, upper fret access playing happening, and so it definitely changed everything. And I feel like I learned a lot when I picked up an electric guitar and then went back to acoustic guitar. And like I say, I still play some electric, but still mostly acoustic player.
Bringing you back home.
Yeah, that's right.
So wow, you're 20, 21, you get nominated for a Grammy, and so what, take us forward from there.
So, I mean, that's kind of kick-started about a 10-year run in this duo that I was in. And, we stayed really busy for those 10 years. It was kind of consistently touring 100-plus shows a year.
Wow, 100 shows a year.
Yeah, I mean, it was like the first year we toured, we did Europe 4 times and Australia.
And you're married.
And I'm married, and then I had...
And what does your wife think about this?
She was, definitely has always been very supportive. I did start scaling back once my daughter was born.
Yeah.
We had her when we were both 25, and so it's that was when it's like, hey, I don't want to be gone that many days a year, and so and we definitely were able to be more selective with shows and touring, and but around that time I got to work with Taj Mahal, who's been a huge influence on my music. I got way into blues music around the time I got into Led Zeppelin. I feel like part of especially acoustic bluegrass music is that you're always kind of digging for the source. It's like eventually you go back to Mississippi John Hurt or Mother Maybelle Carter, and it's like, okay, well, that's where this came from. And then like I would listen to people like Tony Rice, who would play John Coltrane songs, and so I would go listen to John Coltrane. And so when I got into Zeppelin, I started getting into the blues stuff, and I would went down Robert Johnson, that rabbit hole, and Muddy Waters and all of that, and then obviously Taj Mahal. And so to work with Taj was just a huge honor, and did a bunch of touring with Taj, and ended up doing a record at Leon Russell's studio, and that's the one that won the Grammy.
Yeah, I was just listening to that.
All right, that
great.
was that evening. We just did a live record. It was everything was completely live, and it's funny because we had done a run of shows with Taj. I'd played guitar, and Taj didn't play guitar. I was just playing his guitar parts. Then when we went to do this, and we kind of had a set list, we did a similar set every night. We might throw a new song in. And I love it because I learned so much from Taj, just because he's a musicologist, and, it's just always listening and to everything, whether it be, he might be listening to a hip hop thing one day, and then in the same hour listening to Bill Monroe, and, and I love that. But when we did that live record, it was totally just calling songs, and which was way cool. I mean, there was a lot of things on that record that we only played that night. We never played them any other night on the tours, and it was a little bit intimidating.
You're dealing with professionals when you're like, go.
I love that, just because it's like most people would just shy away from that completely.
Yeah.
Like, we're going to do a live record, let's do it. Everything exactly like we've done every night. And he was definitely not like that at all. Just throwing everybody off the cuff, and that's my favorite part of playing music, is that spontaneity, and just being able to play, to improvise as freely as I want to, and oftentimes you can't do that unless you just completely cut the ties.
Yeah, absolutely. It must have been really liberating, but also, like, I can imagine a little bit stressful.
It was terrifying. And honestly, I remember coming off the stage that night, because for a multitude of reasons. I'm in this show with Taj Mahal, and I sing some of the songs on the record. That was intimidating. Playing Taj's guitar parts in front of him was intimidating. Being in Leon Russell's studio in front of a live audience was intimidating. Playing brand new songs that we didn't know were going to get played, And I remember leaving that night and just really unsure of myself and how it went. And I think there was part of that was just because I wasn't expecting it. And so I didn't have everything, like if we'd have played the same songs over and over again, I kind of know, I can expect what I was going to do.
Yeah.
Where we didn't, it's like, that was a completely different thing that I played, so I don't know if it's any good or not. And then when the record came out, I didn't listen to it for a while. It was a couple weeks.
Were you nervous?
I was nervous to hear it, because I didn't want to hear it and just be disappointed with how I played. I knew Taj sounded great, and but I didn't want to be disappointed with how I played. And I think honestly it was probably when the Grammy nomination rolled in. Like, I should probably check that record out.
So wait, so where were you when you heard that you'd been nominated for Grammy?
Well, the first Grammy story is my favorite, because my daughter was like 7 days old, and this is the first record that Rob Ickes and I did, and 2015, I guess, was the nomination time, and so I was changing my daughter's diaper, and I had my phone in the other room. The ringer was on for some reason. I rarely ever do that. And my phone was just going nuts.
Oh, it blew up.
Everybody was calling me. like everybody I'd ever met in my life had decided to call, which, after I figured it out. But then when I checked my phone, it was just a ton of congrats, congratulations, congratulations. And it took a good 15 minutes to realize what had happened. And then a good, couple of hours of like, did we
You're
really?
sitting there with the poopy diaper.
Exactly. Yeah. It was definitely the yin and the yang of the moment.
And you're probably, hadn't slept in 7 days. And,
Yes. It was definitely, is this a hallucination, or I don't know that this is real. And
how did that hit? Like, I mean,
it was huge because especially that first record that Rob Ickes and I did, it was so just off the cuff. Like we had a few songs. I wrote 2 or 3 of the songs on the record. Other than that, we didn't really have anything planned. Like we just went in the studio with a bunch of musicians and played songs, called songs, played them. And so it's very much the 2 records that I've been, nominated for were like that, where it's just completely off the cuff.
And it's like the opposite of every other record.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
Every other Grammy is
and then, that
super
was,
produced.
Not to bring my new record in, but that was one of the things, like I had the songs picked out, but I didn't want to do any more than a few takes of any song, just because there's something that lives in the spontaneity, that there's an energy that it's you can feel it when you're listening to an album. And all of my favorite albums were like that, whether it be, I feel like there maybe not spontaneity in Slayer records, but there is that energy, and there's that energy when you listen to Kind of Blue, and there's that energy when you listen to Flat and Scruggs live at Carnegie Hall, and it's a common thread through all my favorite albums. So I want to bring a piece of that into what I do, and so that was the first 2 albums, hopefully of more that got nominated for a Grammy.
Now the second one, like, tell me about, like, where were you when you heard about it?
Well, the second one, it was obviously I wasn't changing a diaper, but I was totally clueless that they were, doing the award nomination ceremony that day. And a similar thing, I was, probably picking my daughter up from school or something. And, but I know she's into sports and gymnastics and theater, so we could have been doing any number of things. But I remember my phone going nuts while I was driving, and when I finally stopped, and I think Taj called, and so he's not one to call that often, and so when he called, I was very, very happy to hear that we got the nomination, and that when I brought my family to the award show, and it was great. We got to hang with. I've become kind of internet friends with a lot of people that have been my heroes, and I like hung with Mike Dirnt while I was out there. It was one of my favorite musicians that I'd never met formally in person, and Rob Halford, and got to introduce my daughter to Rob Halford, and that was a highlight.
So how did, tell me what your wife and daughter, you take them to the Grammys, like they see you win a Grammy, like what did they say? What do they think?
Well, my daughter was she was sobbing when we won.
So sweet.
And it was during the they had the early award show.
Yeah.
So it was during that, and everything's super quick, and I was not, I wasn't going to go up at all, and I knew Taj was there, and so, and luckily they, let Taj get up and give a few moments to speak, and then my daughter's big into, Taylor Swift and all the kind of more pop-oriented music, and so she was just excited to be there. Where's Sabrina Carpenter, and everybody was going to be playing that night, but we just we had such a great time. Even the rest of the earlier award show, got to hang with so many great people. And, definitely such a sense of community. Even without calling a genre border, it's music in general is pretty community based, as it turns out.
Yeah, it sounds amazing, and so great you can have your family there. And,
that was definitely like I wanted to go, and I would have gone, but that was a big thing. It's like I kept my daughter out of school a couple days, and she got to come home with a bunch of Grammy swag, so she was happy.
So let's talk a little bit about gear.
Yeah,
and is crazy. Like, there's nothing more personal than an instrument.
Yeah.
And you can walk into a music store, and you think you're gonna love this guitar, and you pick it up and you play, and you're like, no, This is just not it. And then you spend God knows how many hours, and then you just pick something up, and you're like, oh my God, that just like feels right for my soul. Like, and so, tell me about like, what you like to play, and then we're going to talk about this instrument specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I have become a guitar collector, as I think
it's a sickness.
It is, and I think most guitar players. I remember, Marty Stuart has this massive guitar collection that it actually was a touring, like a museum for a while, and he made a joke a long time ago. Oh, you're not a serious guitar player until you've got 20. And
that's fair. But then once you have 20, you're hooked.
And then once you have 20, you got to have 20 more, But I've collected and have owned many guitars throughout my life. And so it's funny, I've always played, like, mostly when I'm playing acoustic, I always gravitate towards, these bigger, like dreadnought guitars or jumbo guitars. Hardly ever anything smaller. And so I've kind of gathered many big dreadnought guitars, everything from old Martins. I've got a couple old Martins, and so it's always been like this searching thing. And it used to be kind of a fun little thing where I would just take a new guitar out on the road almost every time. Like, my touring schedule is typically not like weeks or months at a time. It's usually, I'll be out a week, home for a week, out for it's like try to take it in smaller sections to where I'm actually home for a little bit.
Nice.
And I would bring a different guitar out. And there's always a little bit of how does this one play? You never really know a guitar until you take it on the road, and it's the only guitar that you have.
You're going with one?
I only travel with one most of the time.
That's gutsy.
It was dumb, I think would be the right terminology.
What could go wrong?
Yeah, exactly. And so I would bring these guitars out, and like, that was the worst. It would be like on a week trip, and day one, like, this sucks. This is not going to be a fun week. and that's happened a few times. And so really, like, I would just do that for years at a time. And I met a lot of the folks at Taylor, 2015-ish, something like that, when I moved to Nashville, or a little bit before that. And especially because the earlier years of me playing acoustic was always mic'd on stage, just always play through a mic. Mm-hmm. And there's so many limitations with that. Whereas, whether it be if you're outside, the weather can, if it's too windy, you're not gonna be able to hear your guitar solo. And then big boomy guitars typically don't tend well in a live setting with the microphone in front of them. And so I started wanting to plug in, and I knew Taylor had a great system, and so I started playing their dreadnoughts. I had a 510 around that time. But then I started working some with some Bags pickups, LR Bags pickups. And I really liked the way they sounded, and so that's been a kind of a constant puzzle piece for me is the Bags pickups since I first tried them. And then, I think I just went through different guitars, and I've always loved what Taylor and Andy Powers have done. And then when Andy was telling me about the Gold Label stuff, I tried one of the A14, the first iteration of the Gold Label, and really liked it. It just wasn't really the body style that I would typically play, but I knew it had the thing. It had the sparkle that had been looking for. And so he then sent me a prototype of the Grand Pacific, the 517 Gold Label. And I used that, pretty much consistently every show for, 3 months, which never happens.
Yeah.
And then we started talking more about this guitar, or the beginning stages of it, and he sent me a prototype, and I used it. Every show was a Gold Label from the moment I got one. And that had never happened in 25 years of playing. Maybe when I was first starting out and I only had one guitar, but after that, when I had multiple to choose from, I had never brought the same one more than a couple of weeks in a row. And it really stood out when I started working on my record, because I always bring a ton of guitars to the studio when I'm doing an album. Basically bring everything I own and lug it in. And I ended up using the 517, probably half the 517 Gold Label, and the prototype of this guitar on the other half. Mm-hmm. And I worked with a producer on my album, this guy Brent Mayer, who's a legendary Nashville producer and has done everything. Like, he was the engineer on Ike and Tina Turner's Proud Mary and all of that first Sly and the Family Stone record, and he produced the last #1 single Elvis ever had.
Oh, wow.
Way Down, and he's worked with so many great people and knows his stuff. And so I knew when I played those guitars, and he would talk about how great they sounded. It's like, well, I mean, I knew it, but it's always good to hear the outside source. Like, holy crap, what is that guitar?
So what is special about this guitar specifically? This is your signature model.
It is, yeah.
And so you work with Andy Powers. I literally spent the day with Andy Powers yesterday.
All right.
I went down to San Diego. We spent the day in his factory. My God, that guy, he is constantly innovating.
He is.
I mean, he started building guitars as a teenager and was known as one of the best luthiers in the United States, and then got asked to run Taylor guitars, and he is constantly pushing the innovation boundaries.
He is.
And so you get to work with Andy. What did you guys concoct? How did you approach this?
Well, it's funny because I've worked on and off with Andy. I met him, one of the first times I went into the Taylor showroom in Nashville, and I remember playing a prototype. This was 2015 or 16 of the Grand Pacific. And that guitar haunted me for years. And it turns out it was a variation of what would become the Gold label. And then they, when they made the full line Grand Pacific, I really loved that guitar and the V-bracing. But again, I would bring different guitars. And so when I started playing that 517 Gold label all the time, I didn't know anything about the bracing patterns or any unique things that it had. I just knew it sounded great. Mm-hmm. And so when we first started talking about a signature model, I was just kind of obviously I'm in. I want to be a part of this and I want to do it. I just have no notes. There's nothing that I can say that would make this guitar better. The only thing that from a personal standpoint, is that I prefer square shoulder dreadnoughts to rounded shoulder dreadnoughts, which is a minuscule difference. But for me, I can hear a little bit more bottom end with just having a little bit more body. And I just, from a traditional standpoint, I've always loved the look of a square shoulder dreadnought. But I didn't know if Taylor would even do that, because I didn't, they haven't done a 510 or a 10 model in a while. And they were all on board for it, and a big part of it was just making sure the neck felt great. I don't really like any V in the neck. So there's, made sure that was all good. I liked it a little bit chunkier. Obviously the bracing pattern is the same as is in the Gold label, all of the Gold label models. But there's just something, as soon as I played it, it's there's just something extra about this guitar. Most guitars they really excel at one or two things. They've got a great, lower end. They've got that top end sparkle. There's always something about a guitar that stands out. And with these, it's almost like the entire guitar stood out. Mm-hmm. And if I wanted it to do, this loud kind of boomy bluegrass flat picking thing, it would do that. If I wanted it to quieten up and be big and warm, it would do that. And I think the ultimate test was taking it to the studio, And I remember there was a couple of times, the one with Brent was a big time. And then I was sitting in with Bela Fleck. And his front of house guy came down. It was, way in the back of the room. And he comes walking down during sound check. And he said, "Holy crap, what is that guitar?" And it was this guitar, it was,
Love that.
Not this particular one, but it was my model, It's really, everybody that has played it has had that, reaction, including myself, So I think that was the big thing, was just we had talks of the sunburst color, and we had talks of, I am particular about the pickup. I really wanted the LR Baggs Anthem SL, and that's what I use in all of my guitars. Bone bridge pins. Just for me, it gives a little bit more punch. And so those were the particulars, is that how can we make this
and somehow it came together,
and
people are just noticing.
It was, and I didn't, really want to just totally have, Andy on the phone for 2 hours when I already love the sound of it. But we did talk in depth about these guitars and how they should sound and how you should voice them. And I mean, he nailed it. Obviously, they sent me one prototype of it, and I was just blown away. And then when I got the actual model, it sounds just like the prototype, plays just like it, And I love that the one I play is just off the rack. It's this one belongs to Jay at Taylor, and it's this serial number is one number away from mine, and it was between one of these that just came off the rack, and I've played several of them. I just played the Grand Ole Opry a couple weeks ago, and this guy's playing the band Alabama is playing my signature model on the road this summer.
How cool is that?
Yeah, and so
Right?
he brought it backstage into my dressing room, and we got a picture of the two guitars together. I played his, and it's killer. It's just like mine. It's like there's that consistency.
Now you're going to make me go buy one of these.
That's the goal, right?
That's right.
But no, it really was like, that's such a big thing is that, with especially bluegrass and acoustic guitars in general, like there's so much, I grew up being a 10-year-old wanting to play a guitar that Doc Watson played or Tony Rice played. And hopefully if somebody sees me play this and they go play it, I know they're getting a great guitar.
Yeah.
And that's the most important thing,
Yeah, absolutely. It makes all the difference just finding something that just feels right, sounds right, it like fits you.
Yeah, exactly. It is like my voice. So I finally figured out how to get that. And that's pretty cool.
Well, I'm going to shift gears one last time. Do you have a Guitar Center story?
I have many. My favorite Guitar Center story. I grew up in a town called Jonesboro, Tennessee, and obviously we now have a Guitar Center. We have one in Johnson City, but we didn't have one, when I was a kid and even into young adult. So before I moved to Nashville, me and my wife had just gotten married. And it was always like once a year when I would go either to Nashville or whatever, I would stop at the one in Knoxville, Tennessee.
Nice. Oh, I've been there. I've been that one.
Yeah, I would go there, and that was kind of like the Mecca. It was like it's literally a part of my trip. I was okay. Well, I can make it an hour and a half, 2 hours before I get to the Guitar Center in Knoxville, and then it's another 3 hours from there.
It's all part of the map.
It's all part of the map. And I remember I'd saved up money. I was going to go buy a 335, and on the way, it was like I think it was July 3rd, and 110 degrees in East Tennessee. Super hot day, and out in the middle of nowhere, popped a tire on our way. And we had probably not left. We'd only been driving 10 minutes, and so I figured out how to change the tire, and we went on a really terrible tire all the way. We kept the journey. It's like I have to get to Guitar Center today. It is not. There's no option of no, and so we made the Guitar Center and back. And I learned how to change a tire, and I got a 335.
You got a 335.
That was a good day.
All right. Yeah. Was that your first 335?
That was it. Yeah, that was the first one I've and really I haven't. I've owned a couple, but that's always been my favorite one. And it was the same thing. Like I went to the store, and they probably had 5 or 10 of them, and played all of them, and really liked that one. And that's a great store. Was just there not too long ago, a couple months back, and then now we've got, like I said, we got one in Johnson City, which is great, and there's a great one in Nashville. There's several, but my favorite one is in Nashville, and they've always got killer old vintage guitars, and
that store is special.
It is a great one. Yeah, it's a great store. So yeah, I have a new Guitar Center story every time I go into one, but that's my favorite.
Well, I hope it wasn't too risky driving on that tire.
It was. We made it there and back. Everything was good. Got a good guitar.
All right, everybody. Trey Hensley, thank you. What a great story. Love listening to your music.
Thank you very much.
Play. Like, you are a really special musician.
Well, I appreciate that very much. Thanks for having me on here.
All right, great to meet you.
Yeah, man. You too.
Thank you.